In the 17th century, life in America was far from the promise many settlers imagined. European colonists arrived with hope, but quickly faced severe economic hardship. The New World was unfamiliar, unforgiving, and poorly understood by newcomers. Early settlements struggled to grow enough food for survival. Many colonists lacked farming experience suitable for American soil. Harsh winters destroyed crops and caused widespread hunger. Disease spread rapidly due to poor sanitation and limited medical knowledge. Small wooden homes offered little protection from cold and storms. Communities were isolated, making trade and supply chains unreliable. Food shortages became a regular part of colonial life. Jamestown stands as one of the earliest examples of extreme hardship. Settlers depended heavily on supplies from England that often arrived late or not at all. The starving time revealed how fragile colonial survival truly was. Malnutrition weakened bodies and reduced the ability to work. Labor shortages slowed economic growth in early colonies. Many families lived day to day with no savings or security. Economic inequality emerged quickly within settlements. A small elite controlled land and resources. Most colonists owned little or no property. Debt became a common burden across colonial society. Indentured servitude became a widespread system of labor. Poor Europeans exchanged years of work for passage to America. Many servants endured harsh conditions and abuse. Freedom after service did not guarantee financial stability. Land was expensive and often unavailable. Opportunities for advancement were limited for the poor. Social mobility was more myth than reality for many settlers. Education remained inaccessible to struggling families. Children often worked instead of attending school. Poverty shaped life choices from an early age. Native American displacement also contributed to economic instability. Colonial expansion destroyed indigenous food systems and communities. Violent conflicts disrupted farming and trade. Wars between settlers and native tribes devastated entire regions. King Philip's War left towns burned and families homeless. Rebuilding required resources most colonists did not have. Economic recovery was slow and uneven. Frontier settlements faced constant uncertainty. Isolation increased vulnerability to hunger and violence. Survival required relentless physical labor. By the early 18th century, colonial cities began to grow. Boston, New York, and Philadelphia attracted laborers seeking work. Urban growth created overcrowded living conditions. Poor sanitation caused frequent outbreaks of disease. Unemployment rose as competition for jobs increased. Wages remained low for unskilled workers. Housing shortages forced families into cramped spaces. Widows and orphans faced extreme economic hardship. Charitable aid was limited and inconsistent. Churches became primary sources of relief. Laws often punished the poor rather than supporting them. Begging and homelessness were criminalized. Workhouses were harsh and dehumanizing. Colonial leaders feared social unrest. Strict moral judgments blamed individuals for poverty. Structural inequality was rarely acknowledged. Economic systems favored landowners and merchants. Trade regulations imposed by Britain limited colonial growth. Mercantilist policies benefited the empire, not local workers. Taxes increased financial pressure on struggling families. Slavery became deeply intertwined with colonial poverty. Enslaved Africans endured extreme exploitation and violence. Forced labor built wealth for plantation owners. Freedom and opportunity were denied entirely. Free black communities also faced severe discrimination. Economic independence was nearly impossible. Racial hierarchy reinforced economic inequality. Southern colonies depended heavily on plantation systems. Northern colonies relied on trade and manual labor. Both systems produced widespread hardship. The French and Indian War further strained colonial economies.
Military costs increased taxes and debt. Farms were abandoned during conflict. Inflation reduced purchasing power. Poor families suffered the most from rising prices. Economic frustration spread across the colonies. Resentment toward British rule intensified. Working-class colonists felt ignored and exploited. Economic inequality fueled revolutionary sentiment. Calls for liberty were deeply connected to hardship. The American Revolution was influenced by economic struggle. Promises of equality appealed to the poor. Independence offered hope for change. However, poverty did not disappear after victory. Many veterans returned home without compensation. Debt remained widespread in the new nation. Land ownership continued to favor elites. Economic reform moved slowly. The foundations of inequality remained intact. Early America carried poverty into its future. This period reveals that hardship was central to American history. Struggle shaped resilience, resistance, and identity. The roots of modern inequality trace back to colonial times. Understanding this past helps explain present challenges. The story of America includes ambition, survival, and hardship together.
As the 19th century began, the United States expanded rapidly across the continent. Westward migration promised opportunity, but often delivered hardship. Small farmers moved into unfamiliar territories with limited resources. Frontier life demanded constant labor with little financial reward. Many settlers lived without access to markets or stable income. Crop failure could ruin an entire family within a single season. Transportation limitations made selling goods difficult. Isolation increased vulnerability to hunger and illness. Economic survival depended heavily on weather and land quality. Debt followed many families as they tried to establish farms. Industrialization slowly transformed American society. Factories emerged in northern cities. Rural workers migrated to urban centers in search of employment. Cities grew faster than infrastructure could support them. Overcrowded neighborhoods became common. Tenement housing offered poor ventilation and sanitation. Disease spread quickly through dense populations. Wages remained low despite long working hours. Child labor became a necessity for many families. Education was sacrificed for survival. Factory owners accumulated wealth at unprecedented levels. Workers had little bargaining power. Unsafe conditions led to frequent injuries and deaths. There were no labor protections in early industrial America. Unemployment created constant fear among workers. A single accident could plunge a household into desperation. Women earned significantly less than men. Immigrants faced discrimination and exploitation. New arrivals from Ireland and Germany filled the poorest jobs. Language barriers limited opportunities for advancement. The Irish potato famine accelerated immigration to the United States. Many immigrants arrived with no money or social support. Urban poverty increased rapidly. Ethnic neighborhoods formed out of necessity. Prejudice restricted housing and employment options. Political machines exploited poor communities for votes. Public assistance remained minimal. Charity organizations could not meet growing demand. Homelessness became more visible in major cities. Begging was common in industrial centers. Slavery continued to define economic inequality in the South. Plantation wealth depended entirely on enslaved labor. Enslaved families were denied wages and legal rights. Violence maintained the system of forced labor. Southern poor whites also struggled economically. Land ownership was concentrated among elites. Economic mobility remained extremely limited. Education access was scarce in rural regions. The wealth gap widened across the nation. Regional economies developed unevenly. The Civil War devastated southern infrastructure. Farms, railroads, and towns were destroyed. Millions were left impoverished after the conflict. Formerly enslaved people faced freedom without resources. Reconstruction promised opportunity but delivered limited results. Sharecropping trapped families in cycles of debt. Crop liens favored landowners and merchants. Economic dependence replaced legal slavery. Violence suppressed economic progress. Racial inequality became institutionalized. Northern industrial growth continued after the war. Railroads expanded national markets. Wealth accumulated among industrialists. Workers remained vulnerable to exploitation. Strikes emerged as a response to injustice. Labor unions formed under intense opposition. Government intervention favored business interests. Economic depressions periodically collapsed job markets. The Panic of 1873 caused widespread unemployment. Savings disappeared for working families. Urban poverty deepened toward the late 19th century. Slums expanded alongside luxury neighborhoods. Public health crises became common. Clean water and sanitation remained inaccessible to many. Crime increased as survival became difficult. Police enforcement often targeted the poor. Social reformers began documenting living conditions. Journalists exposed industrial exploitation. Public awareness slowly increased. Change remained gradual and contested. Women workers faced extreme inequality. Factory jobs paid barely enough to survive. Domestic service offered limited security. Single mothers struggled without legal protections. Widowhood often led to destitution. Social norms restricted economic independence. Children worked in mills and mines. Injuries permanently altered young lives. Education reform faced resistance from employers. Profit consistently outweighed welfare concerns. Economic opportunity remained tied to race and class. Native American communities suffered continued displacement. Reservation systems destroyed traditional economies. Federal policies enforced dependency. Poverty became systemic rather than temporary. American expansion produced winners and losers. The idea of the American dream contrasted with reality. Hard work did not guarantee success. Structural barriers shaped outcomes. Inequality became deeply rooted. By the end of the 19th century, poverty was undeniable. Industrial progress masked widespread suffering. Economic growth benefited a small percentage. Millions lived paycheck to paycheck. The foundations of modern inequality were firmly established. Urban and rural poverty